and it has created everything. But I found in the beginning, we all began with God. We were all part of this God source, this tremendous energy force. And God was curious. He was lonely and he was curious. He decided he wanted to explore, but he couldn't do it on his own. So he exploded out. And when he did, all of these little sparks of light flew out in all these different directions. I had one client describe it very similar. It's like a bubble or like an embryo, the same thing exploding. Others have just talked about it being a huge light. But as it explodes out, all of these little sparks went out in all different directions. These are the sparks of life. Some of these sparks became galaxies, some of them became planets, and some became individual souls. And those individual souls were sent out on a journey to learn as much as they could, to accumulate as much knowledge as they could, because God wanted knowledge. And the final goal was to accumulate all of the knowledge you can from everything, and then bring it back to God. In that way, we ourselves, in the body of God, journeying through the universes, finding things out and bringing it back in the end to God. That's the final destination after you've gone through all these different lives, learned all of these different things, accumulated as much as we can, going back in between each life to the spirit side and going higher and higher. When you have finally completed everything that you have to do, then you return to God and are once more back with God. And at one time I said that at a lecture, and a woman in the back said, "And then what?" That is supposed to be the ultimate whenever you get to that point. But I imagine then it could start all over again, because God has an insatiable curiosity, an insatiable quest for knowledge. And that's why there is no good, there is no bad, there is no evil, because it's only negative and positive, because everything is a lesson. Even what we consider to be the negative, what we consider to be the evil and the bad, there's a lesson in it that we have to learn. And people have bad things happen to them. Everyone does. But I always ask them, what did you learn from it? If you learned even one thing from the experience, then that was the reason for you having that experience. And of course, if you don't learn anything, then you are doomed to take a test over again until you finally do learn. But the idea is to keep growing and adding more and learning more each time around. Then we return to the God source. I've had people, many of them now, that have gone in their regressions, instead of going into past lives, they go back to the source. They go back to God. And when they do, they said it is so much love, they don't want to leave again. This is where they began, and they remember their beginnings before they were sent out. They said it was such a feeling of togetherness, such a beautiful, comfortable feeling of such great love that they couldn't even describe it. It's like nothing they had ever experienced on earth. And when they experienced that, then they were forced to go out. They said then it was the feeling of loneliness, being by themselves, and searching all the time, wanting, what is it? What is missing? Many people have reported a great sadness, wanting to go home, and they didn't know where home was. This is our home. And they have this deep inside of them, knowing that earth is not what it's all about. They want to return home. But this is what they have felt when I've done the regressions and they have gone out, been sent out from the source. out into the world. Eventually, they will return. That's why sometimes whenever they find this out, this is what the source of their problems is. They can come to terms with it, and they can relax, knowing eventually when we accumulate all the knowledge, we will return to that home. And that can be very comforting to a lot of people. So, on this quest for knowledge, though, Earth is only one of the schools. I've been told that Earth is a very young planet. It's only been over here in this part of the cosmos for a very short time in the history of all of the universes. It's a young planet. That's more than one reason why we're isolated, so we won't infect the other planets and galaxies, because we are still learning, we're still working out all this violence that we come up with. So we've been placed over here in isolation and quarantine, I guess you would say, in this part of the galaxy. But the human soul, the spirit, the spark of life that we are, has been around forever. And it will continue to be around forever. So you know it has been experiencing many different types of lives before it ever came to the planet Earth, because Earth is a younger planet. What were you doing with all those other times that you were out exploring, learning different lessons and different lives? And what are you going to be doing when you finish here? In those other times, you were on other planets, other dimensions, living in places you can't even possibly imagine, because you were learning different types of lessons. The lessons of Earth is to learn emotions and limitations. Earth is a challenging planet, and a lot of souls don't want to come here because of that. Other planets that they've gone to and have lived on, there were challenges, but not the type we have here. And it was totally different type of life. But they learned those different lessons, and then they came here. This is the most difficult one. Why we have to keep coming back again and again, because there's so many different types of lessons to learn. And after we finally leave here, we may go off and try adventures somewhere else, another planet, another dimension, that will offer different kinds of challenges. So we are constantly going to different places, learning more. So a lot of the people that I have regressed have gone to lifetimes when they were on other planets, they were other creatures. And I think this is important to know, that this body is not the only one you have experienced. Another reason, I've done 20 years of UFO research, working with cases, it helps people to understand this better. They are not alien. They are not out there different and foreign. They could have been us, because the human soul is experiencing these different lives also. They are just a soul, a spark of life existing in these bodies. Even though they are different, there's something we can't understand. It is just a spark of life having a lesson, learning experience in those types of bodies. And when you begin to understand those things, it makes understanding the UFO phenomena a lot easier. But we'll go into that in future talks, because I've written 4 books on that, and I've had many cases on that, and I've come up with theories nobody else has come up with. But what I want to talk about now are the different types of lives people have had on other planets. And believe me, this really does affect their lives now. It's carry over deep in their psyche. The past lives have reasons that they don't know about that affects their lives now, but also the past lives as aliens and other planets are also affecting their lives now. I've had 2 different people who carried around a great sadness in this life. One of these was a woman in Singapore, And in Singapore, when I went there was not very much metaphysical literature. There was not very much about UFOs or anything over there. So they said these people could not have been exposed to these ideas through reading. But she told me she had always had this great sadness, and she didn't know where it came from. Her parents said they have no pictures of her smiling at all. It was as though this great sadness had permeated her life the entire time, and the main thing she wanted to know was, where did this come from? Well, we went back to a time where she was there when her planet was destroyed. I think this was the one. She was on a spaceship, and she was coming back to home. And as she came in, and the little spaceship had left the main one, and it was circling the planet, coming in for a landing. It was total horror because you couldn't discern anything. The cities were gone. The people were gone. Everything looked as though it was scorched. It was burned. Something had happened, a catastrophe had happened that had completely destroyed all the life on the earth. Some kind of, I don't know if it seemed like it might have been man-made, but it was like as though nuclear things had gone off. I don't know if it was actually nuclear, but everything was burnt. She landed her ship, and she was looking for her friends, her family, and the place where she lived. There was nothing. And she had to get back into the ship to go back to the main craft. And it was just total horror and devastation to realize everything was destroyed. She could never, ever go home again. And when she came back to the ship, the way they entered the ships had to be done with the mind. This is the way a lot of the craft are powered anyway, is by thinking. And she was so distraught, she couldn't even think how to get into the craft. But she finally did get in, and then she collapsed, and it was as though everything was over. There was nothing left. She carried that deep-seated sadness into this life because she could never go home to her home planet where she was so happy. She had to go somewhere else. But it didn't make sense because it didn't come from another life on Earth. It came from a life where the whole planet had been destroyed. Another woman that I worked with also had this deep sadness of not knowing where it came from. And she was on board a spaceship and watched as her planet was totally blown apart, all into smithereens and bits as it flew out into space. And there was no way she could ever go home again either. So it's strange that these things do carry over into this lifetime. The memory of living in other civilizations. And I had one person went into a life where they were all living underground on a planet, and they were more or less just like carbon copies of each other. Everybody looked alike, and they were producing other bodies in a laboratory type